Recording in progress.
All right, start the class. Oh. 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 श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पाद शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं समस्तजनकल्याणे निरतं करुणामयं नमामि चिन्मयं देवं सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरं मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् परमानन्दमाधवम् नमः श्रीशङ्करानन्द गुरुपादाम्बुजन्मने सविलासमहामोह ग्राहग्रासैककल्मणि. Okay, so in the last class we have seen the two of the first two verses of the first chapter Tattva Viveka from the Panchadashi of Swami Vidyaranya. Okay? So here what we have seen is the first two verses are Mangala Charanam, or the prayer that is offered to Guru, and also it's an introduction to the text, what we call that as Anubandha Chatushtaya, like any other book. You take Tattva Bodha, you take Atma Bodha, every one of them will have this introductory verse, like what we mentioned. And we have seen that the first two verses covered that, and I will not go into the details. But this third verse too, as I mentioned in the last class, 3 to 10 are the verses which actually give crux of Vedanta. It defines the true nature of Jiva, which we are trying to understand. And also it defines how it can be equated to that Brahman, who is defined in terms of either Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, or you can call that as Sat Chit Ananda. Yeah? So at an individual level, we feel that Satyam Jnanam Anantam as Sat Chit Ananda, and that is what Swamiji will prove, that these two are one and the same. Yeah? That is how the text is there. They will take us from the verse 3 to verse 10. So for us to understand the nature of the jiva, yeah, as that of consciousness, especially consciousness, because existence, so to say, will be experienced more outside than inside. Only when we think about, we know we exist. Nobody needs to tell us that we exist. But when it comes to the individual, definitely from the moment we get up in the morning till we fall flat on the bed, we always feel we are conscious. Nobody needs to say. In fact, we define a person's existence is alive by the fact that we are existing. Yeah, that consciousness is a very important aspect for us to define the jivatva. Am I audible? I'm seeing some. Okay, all right, thank you. So it is then it is very important for us to understand this consciousness term, yeah? Because our experience and also the study that we do, the secular study we do in our schools, consciousness has got a different definition than what our Shastras define this consciousness as. Yeah? And also they go into much more depth in terms of understanding. Why? Because this is how I define myself. I am existing and I am a jiva, I am alive, I am sentient only because I feel that consciousness is there both in my mind as well as in my body. Now, to understand how our Shastras, Advaita Vedanta, defines this consciousness, Swamiji takes us through step by step in the few verses. But for them to understand, I will briefly give an introduction to this concept of consciousness as Advaita Vedanta, and Swamiji actually defines this. Yeah? Normally, modern science defines consciousness as an evolute of the mind. Means a mind is there when a jiva is born. Mind is a prerequisite for consciousness to be born. So mind is there. So through mind, consciousness is born. And consciousness then becomes an individual property of the mind. And it is very logical for people to think that way, yeah, from the perspective of logic, because only wherever mind is there, there seems to be this consciousness that gets manifested. And it is our experience, every individual experience, that when the mind is absent, whether people go into coma or sometimes just we fall down and we lose consciousness for some time. Yeah, maybe because of stress, because of heat. There can be any reason, number of reasons when we lose consciousness. Suddenly, that thing is gone. As far as the sentiency is concerned, I am no longer aware of my surroundings. Yeah? So, from that perspective, it appears that experience seems to support that. However, our Shastras, Advaita Vedanta, believes this to be a bit more deeper than this evolute of the mind. Why? Because we go by a bit more logical in terms of understanding this consciousness, in terms of telling that our normal experience is that our mind is there, consciousness is there, agree, but wherever something inert is there, the inert cannot produce a consciousness. For example, a rock you take, or a mountain, or any of the inert substances around that you see, consciousness doesn't come through out of an inert substance. And if we go a bit deeper into our own body and our own mind, what Shastras say is that these two are inert. There is no doubt about it, because once a person dies, we know body is an inert substance that is there. So-called mind, again, if you take a physical organ, which we call as mind, again is an inert substance which is there. So a consciousness associated with that, or a prana associated manifested through this consciousness, what we Shastras say is cannot be an evolute of that inert substance. Like any other inert substance is not my experience. If it is happening with my mind, then it should happen around with many other inert substances, then we can accept. So from that perspective, if we see, consciousness cannot be an evolute of the mind. However, there is an experience associated with this mind, nobody can deny, like how science is telling. Yeah? Both we have to see. To understand this, Shastras give a very beautiful example. This example is when you go out on a full moon night. Yeah, full moon night is there. Full moon is there. Fortunately, it is not snowing. There is no cloud cover, and you have a full moon that is visible, and the moonlight is spread across the entire area that you can observe. Now everybody enjoys that. Yeah, full moon. Everybody enjoys that. People consider very romantic. Poets have written many poems associated with that. Very, very beautiful experience. Nobody can deny. And if somebody asks you the question, anybody will answer, oh, full moon night is very, very good. But that experience that I cannot deny through an experiential point of view, when I go into a science class and I recognize that moon by itself does not have any light, it is actually a reflected light of the sun, nobody can deny. Experientially, I experience the full moon light, no doubt about that. I also describe that as a full moon light. Yeah, no doubt from that perspective. However, that experience seems to be overwritten by my understanding and knowledge of science, which actually puts across to say that actually it is the sunlight just getting reflected off the moon. So what I actually see on the earth is not really the moonlight, but what we are looking at is only a reflected sunlight, and moon becomes only a surface for that reflection. One point associated with that. Yeah, this is one of the ways to look at this one. Second thing is on the same property. Again, moon being an inert object cannot produce a light of its own. Like sun is able to do, moon cannot produce a light of its own, but appears to be lighted up under special circumstances. Third, when we talk about, I am seeing the moon in the sky. Yeah, moon is fully lighted up, very beautiful. We can see that. However, in and around the moon, there is absolutely no light associated with that, and it is all pitch dark. Only the moon appears to be very, very bright. However, again, the science tells us the truth is that the sun's radiation is not really limited to the moon. Moon cannot limit the sun's radiation power. Sun's radiation is everywhere. Only that aspect of the moon that comes in the path, when I am able to see it directly, it appears to be shining. However, it cannot limit the overall the radiation which is available in terms of the sun. If some other object comes across that particular path of radiation, it also gets lighted up. So really speaking, although moon appears to be giving light, even if I accept that it is giving reflected sun's radiation as the light aspect, still we cannot say that it can limit the extent of the radiation in and around the moon. However, we do require a surface like moon to reflect that particular radiation. In the absence of the moon surface, the entire thing appears dark to me, like in a new moon day. When I'm not able to see the moon, then the entire sky appears very dark. Although radiation is present, but it gets reflected only when there is a reflecting medium. Okay, so there are three, four in this one I have described in this particular one, exactly applicable to the consciousness as we see through the lens of a Vedanta. So what it is telling is similar to the sun's radiation. The consciousness is present everywhere. Yeah, it is not that it will come up only when there is a surface. Radiation is always present. It is only when we are able to look at, even though it is an inert surface, when the consciousness is reflected of the inert mind, because the very nature of the mind is to reflect this consciousness. The mind as though appears conscious. Like sun, moon appears bright and shiny and light. The mind, in turn the body, first mind, and through the mind the body, They appear to be conscious and giving this sentiency, but really speaking, consciousness is the true source of the sentiency or the light that we see in our own mind and body. Similar to the moon, it cannot, the body and mind, although appears shining in terms of consciousness, but it cannot really limit the consciousness that is all pervading. So wherever there is a proper reflecting medium like a mind, it is visible, manifested, but that doesn't mean that other places there is no consciousness. It is similar to what the examples what our Swamijis give every now and then, that a pot when you take and a space is there, we define that as a pot space. But when we move the pot from one area, one corner of the room to the other corner of the room, really you don't carry the space. Space is always available. I only define that as a pot space wherever the pot moves. Similarly, on a stage, for example, a drama is going on. There are 30 characters, small children doing all sorts of things. Really speaking, between the two children, it appears as blank, but consciousness is there everywhere. It gets reflected and gets manifested wherever such reflecting medium is there. So generally, this is the concept that we will be looking at when we talk about consciousness. All-pervading nature of the consciousness, the very fact that consciousness has got a characteristic of reflecting of appropriate medium, like our own mind, and from the mind through the body, it appears to be conscious from time to time. And whenever we lose the consciousness, that means the ability to reflect is temporarily shut off or permanently shut off. That is how we must be looking at from the consciousness perspective. In the sense, if suppose the moon, obviously after the full moon 14 days, it goes into the new moon day, doesn't mean that the sun's radiations have disappeared. We know it is there, only the manifestation requires a specific reflecting medium. So the 5 koshas that we described in terms of physical and subtle body and the causal body, of course, they all are similarly very inert. We know that through our own experience, that once the consciousness is not there, means what? The reflection capacity has gone of the mind, the body falls down, and we know that body is inert. Even why in terms of death or anything, even people who lose consciousness for a temporary period of time, body becomes inert. Although there is a movement is still there, that's why they are still alive. But we know that the physical body is definitely inert. Similarly, your mind is an inert substance. However, it gets alive, it becomes alive, it gets that reflection of that consciousness that is ever present, and that's what makes the inert body and mind sentient. So very important from our perspective of how we understand the life that we talk about. There's a difference between the modern science and our understanding through Advaita philosophy. Yeah. Another beautiful example Swamiji gave when we were going through this class is that you see different electrical bulbs. When you go into Philips showroom, you see right from 0-watt bulb right up to the LED bulbs that are there associated with that, halogen lamps, and so many varieties of lamps are there. But really speaking, when you come and you put the bulb into the socket where it is designed for, and then you switch on the electricity, and this bulb comes to life. And depending upon the voltage and wattage, etc., you have different types of and different colors of this light that come into our experience, so to say. But really speaking, all these bulbs, so-called bulbs, is it really the light is an intrinsic nature of the bulb, or it is the intrinsic nature of the electricity which actually gets light, which actually lights this. Whatever the technology that we talk about, it has to have a backing of an uniform electric current, which will make these bulbs, different bulbs, come and appear and shine as different diverse manifestations, so to say. Similarly, same electricity, when passing through a refrigerator, doesn't produce the light, but it produces a different effect. But whatever the electrical equipment that we are talking about, all of them appear to come to light only when there is a backing of the electricity. So what here we are looking at is that the intrinsic nature that we define bulb, for example, is something which gives light. But really speaking, the inert bulb does not have the capacity to give light unless the electricity passes through it and appears to give that reflection, which produces that, manifests that particular light through the bulb. Yeah? Cannot extend too much into the example, but just to give you an idea of what we are looking at, why there's so much diversity with the same consciousness, which is ever present, and also it is expansive and ever present, everywhere present. That is how the consciousness is defined in our Shastras. Yeah. We will go into this. Please keep this in the background, and the next 6-7 verses will depend on this background information for our analysis that we will be looking at. Okay. Third verse. शब्दस्पर्शदयो वेद्य वैचित्र्या जागरे पृथक् ततो विभक्ता तत्संविद ऐक्यरूप्यान्न भिद्यते. So this is how it is chanted. Yeah. शब्दस्पर्शदयो वेद्य वैचित्र्या जागरे पृथक् ततो विभक्ता तत्संविद ऐक्यरूप्यान्न भिद्यते. Yeah. So here, Vedya, the Vedya means, Ved is the same root as Ved. Yeah? Ved means Vedavit, means a person who knows. Yeah? Knowledge associated with that. So here, what Swamiji is trying to say is Vedya, the root of that I know, means what I know normally, what any person knows are the objects of the world. Five senses are there, and my knowledge in general is limited to what I gain through them. Yeah? And there are other valid means of knowledge like our mind, etc., which will make certain conclusions based on the input, etc., that we talk about. We will go into that a bit more. But generally, when we talk about Ved means knowledge, Vedya means what I am getting knowledge of or the objects of the world. So that is how the Vedya is taken into it. How do I get these Vedya? How do I know about these objects? Is Shabda Sparshadayo. Adaya is etc. Shabda Sparsha. So there are certain things called Shabda Sparsha. What are they? We all know that. Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. So there are 5 senses which are there, sense objects which are there. So Shabda is the sound, Sparsha, touch. Yeah. Rupa is the form. Rasa is the taste. Gandha is the smell. Yeah. So when Swamiji talks about Shabda Sparshadayo Vedya, means all the objects that I gain the knowledge of using these particular 5 sense objects, which are Shabda Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. So the entire world is now being described, or we can say it is reduced to the 5 sense objects, because I entertain the world only through these 5 senses that that Bhagavan has provided me as a jiva. Yeah. So Shabda Sparsha Dayo Vedya, Pruthak. Pruthak word is interesting that it is distinct. Distinct in the sense that they don't cross over each other. In the sense, my the smell faculty that is there that goes through my nose is very distinct from the form faculty that I can look at through my eyes. Similarly, touch, similarly, the other two aspects. So all this Shabda Sparsha Rupa Rasa Gandha are very distinct in terms of my gaining knowledge. No confusion. I close my eyes if I don't want to see something. And just because my nose is open doesn't mean that I can see through my nose. No, it is very distinct in terms of the five senses are very, very distinct. And the word that is used is Pruthak. Pruthak is the word that is used. And Vaichitriya. Vaichitriya, Chitra is the picture, you can say. Vaichitra is very, very distinct, diverse aspects that are there is referred to as Vaichitya. So they are of different nature and they are very, very distinct Pruthak, and there is no confusion when I gain the knowledge of these five objects. And incidentally, these five sense objects define my entire experience of the world around me. I can either see, I can either smell, I can either taste them, touch them, or hear them. So out of these five, only I gain the knowledge and I also experience the whole world. So now he has actually kind of, with this five statement, these five are distinct and also these five don't interfere with each other. My entire experience of the world is now distilled into the five aspects of Shabda Sparsha Rupa Rasa Gandha. Now, when it comes to these sense objects, they are perceived differently, that we agree, and we normally do that in our waking state, correct? So in the waking state, when we talked about, he is referring to that as Jagrate. Yeah, Jagare Prithak. In my waking experience, all the five distinct smells, senses, they operate separately, and there is no confusion in terms of gaining the knowledge using these five senses in my Jagrata Avastha is the waking state. Yeah? And very important word Swamiji uses here in terms of Samvit. Not Samvit. Let us first attack the Samvit aspect which is there. Yeah. So Samvit word that Swamiji uses in the second line. Yeah? Word Samvit indicates it is well known. Yeah? The Sanskrit meaning of the word Samvit is well known. So what is well known to me when it comes to this? The distinct experience that is there associated with in my mind is very well known to me in terms of my experience even inside my mind. Not only I hear through the sound, I retain the knowledge of the sound in my mind also distinct. And well-known aspect associated with that is that I don't require any further instrument to know that. In the sense, my mind doesn't require another internal ear for me to distinguish the sound that is inside me. So it appears that the mind with the consciousness that is there has got the capacity to manifest this sound inside me, manifest this form inside me. All the five aspects that are there, very distinctly they are known to me. Yeah? But more than that, Shabda Sparsha Dayo Prithak that we talk about also brings out one very important aspect of understanding how we gain this knowledge in my mind. Yeah? In the sense, whether it is a sound, whether it is a form, yeah, any of these five sense objects that I try to understand inside my mind, all of them happen to be only in a thought form. So when I'm seeing, for example, a bottle in front of me, a phone in front of me, etc., the phone remains outside, but the experience of that phone is happening inside my mind only as a form, in the form of a thought, which is defined as a vritti in my mind. Yeah, vritti is the thought that we talk about in the mind. I experience all these things only in the form of a thought. But then, if there are so many objects in front of me, suppose I go into a shop and there are so many objects that are laid out for us to observe and enjoy. However, each one seems to be drawn towards only few of the objects. When we come out of the shop, for example, and people ask question as to what you have seen, they all appear to be driven by something internal which will make them see only few of the objects that we come across or in front of us, and others seem to just disappear. Similar to when we grow into a crowd and we walk across in the crowd, we all then appear to be drawn to only few people and few of the faces that gets retained. All others are not really there in our mind after that experience is over. So when we see this, when we talk about the Prithak experience that we talk about the entire world, what Vedanta is telling is, with this Prithak that we talk about, that it is driven at any time by what a jiva decides to look at in terms of or gain that particular knowledge by selecting the sense organ that is there. So suppose there is a what we call a musical program that we went into. We may see many people, many things, but our ear is given extra importance during that time. And what we gain as far as the knowledge is concerned during that experience is mostly the sound driven experience, because I am giving that experience more, I give more preference to that particular sense organ. And that is the reason why the knowledge I gain during that particular this one is the sound. Similarly, when we attend a class or when we go to a lecture, again, it is the sound that we give more importance, and all other experience that may be around are given less importance, and then we gain the knowledge associated with what we chose to operate at a given time. This is one way to look at of what we gain out of so much knowledge that is available at any given time. And what drives this? Suppose it is the only musical program, I know because I went there to only listen, I may do that. But still, there seems to be some inclination in me which actually pushes me into a specific direction and a specific sense organ to be utilized more at a given time in our life, given time in our day. And this is what we call as the vasana. We know that. So two aspects actually drives. One is what sense organ I give preference to gain the knowledge or experience the world. And second is the vasana that is there in the background, or the inclination as we call, which drives as to what is the type of knowledge that we gain and what is the type of experience we gain in a world at any given time. Yeah. So it is a vritti plus indriya. Indriya means sense, which is their sense organ. Vritti, vasana is nothing but a thought which drives you in terms of gaining this knowledge. And in the waking state, we have all the indriyas available to us to gain the knowledge. And this actually gives you an idea of what is that which actually pushes you into one specific direction when it comes to gaining the knowledge that we talk about. So when we talk about every experience is happening inside my mind only, because there is nothing when I see a telephone, for example, in front of me, which is there, I'm not taking the telephone inside my mind, but it appears in my mind as if there is a telephone. I'm seeing that, and what I see is only what I see and experience is only a thought in my mind. Really, the experience is not outside. The experience is definitely only inside. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also says that very clearly, that everything, whatever there is outside, it appears that it is outside. And whatever is happening inside is the one which I am experiencing. There is absolutely nothing that I'm experiencing outside, because if I close my eyes, for example, and if I close my mind, means I go to sleep, the entire world of experiences may be going around me, but none of that comes into my mind. I don't experience the world at all. I go into my own world. Whether it is a real dream or daydreaming, doesn't matter. The moment we cut off that, the entire experience of the world ceases to happen inside me or for me. Yeah. So the entire world of experience that we talk about is only in the thought form. Now, when distinct experiences are happening in my mind, when sound is coming, when sight is coming, when touch sense is coming in, taste, this one is coming in, etc. It is nothing but that it is only the experience that is happening in the form of a thought in my mind. But again, for me to recognize a thought, I think Jayaji explained this as Phalavyapti. So inside the mind, although the thought has come, means the object has come into my mind as a vritti, but the Phalavyapti will happen only when I am conscious of that particular thought. That's why when I may be seen to be sitting here, I'm looking here and there, I'm seeing everything, but really speaking, I will recognize only those items, and only that particular knowledge comes into my mind when I become aware of that particular thought. See, I'm using the words of I, becoming aware, and of the thought. Thought is nothing but the world around me. So when we talk about this, every experience is nothing but a thought or a vritti, and every thought has to be associated with the consciousness behind recognizing that thought. It's as if the consciousness plays with the thought, and thought then becomes a reality, a knowledge in my mind. This is everybody's experience. Yeah. So when we can see that very, very well, that when the options are more, I prefer to happen to select only few in terms of my recognition inside my mind. Other thoughts may come in, other knowledge will come in. For example, when we are deeply involved in watching a movie, for example, yeah, on a TV, we like it very much. Some beautiful Venkateswara Swami Archana is going on. I'm totally engrossed in that. When it happens, children may be shouting there, people may be playing outside, cars are going, honking. Doesn't matter what, none of them seem to disturb me. Not that they have not come into my mind, but my focus is only on that particular thing because I like what I'm seeing. When you see these experiences that are going around you and with you yourself, what we say is every thought must be associated with consciousness to be cognized as an experience, or that experience that results in the knowledge. All right. So it appears then that my experience, so-called, whether it is any of these 5 sense objects that we talk about, each of this experience is actually sentient, because it cannot become an experience unless the consciousness is there behind that particular thought in my mind in terms of my experience. Yeah. For example, a cloth comes in front of me in terms of a dress, beautiful dress, or a suit or a coat or it doesn't matter what. It becomes a cloth experience only when I become conscious of that particular thought which has come into my mind due to vasana. This is another way to look at it. Yeah. And similarly, when a human being comes, we have different experiences associated. But again, all of them are consciousness and a thought, and that thought supported by the consciousness becomes an experience. A thought by itself cannot become my experience unless consciousness comes in contact with it, and the contact comes only with my vasana or my way of looking in terms of my inclination that is associated. Yeah? So, but whether inclination is there or not, sometimes the experiences happen, but all experiences can happen only when I associate the consciousness aspect to the thought aspect which is there. Otherwise, every thought should be known to me. But not all thoughts are known, not all the knowledge that comes in through the senses are known to me, because my consciousness is not getting associated with that particular knowledge or the sense object that is coming inside my mind. From this, what Swamiji says, yeah, he goes a step further and says that every experience that we have has to be only consciousness, and it is not that I am having different experiences with different sense objects that are coming in, but it is only consciousness is being given a different name for that experience to make a reality to me. It is similar, like I described, when only the electricity is passing through, and that electricity is given a different names in terms of a 0-watt bulb or a tube light or a LPG light, whatever we talk about those bulbs associated with that. Any number that you take, it is only the electricity that is being given a different name, but really speaking, we tend to associate that with the objects or the thoughts, but every experience is nothing but a different name given to the same consciousness. Because without that consciousness, it is not possible for us to experience any of these 5 distinct sense objects that are coming in, is how the Swamiji is talking about in terms of the our worldly experience. I will stop here. Any questions on this? Because I think the first 2-3 verses are very important in terms of understanding the very concept. I will check with you if there are any question here, and then we will continue.
Yeah, Shankarji, I have a question.
Yes, please.
When you're saying that lots of thoughts come in the mind, so only when we start associate with the thoughts, then only that becomes the vasana?
Not vasana. Vasana actually drives us to select that particular thought that is coming.
Okay.
Vasana is just an inclination. Yeah. However, unless my consciousness is associated with thought, it won't become an experience to me. So, because when we are traveling, for example, we are going out, lots of sounds may come through, but I don't experience them because I am not focusing on them. The sound has come, it has created a thought in my mind, but my consciousness is not associated with that, so that doesn't become my experience.
So is
Vasana drive us to what we choose.
Okay, is this consciousness is reflected one? It's not the pure self-consciousness.
Correct. Like a moon that we talk about, that is how Shastras describe that. But we will go into that a bit more possibly in the verses that come across. Swamiji will describe that as well. But you are right that inside the mind, when we talk about the consciousness which is associated with the vritti or the thought, is what the reflected consciousness that we talk about. Okay. Yeah, we'll go into details of this reflected consciousness, very deep meanings associated with that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Shankarji, this is
Shankarji.
basically the Chidabhas then, right?
Correct. Chidabhasa is the reflected consciousness that we talk. Sanskrit term is Chidabhasa.
Okay.
So,
Shankarji.
Shankarji, hello.
Kalpana ji, go ahead. Then Abhimanyu can go ahead. Yeah.
So I had a question. So then if you have more vasanas, then that means you would focus on more things, but just at different times. Is that right?
Vasanas are there, definitely yes, but they are also driven by the three gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas.
Right.
They are like driving forces of the vasanas in general. And you are right in the sense that when we get up, our sattva guna is much better because we have taken rest. So at that time, a different type of vasana may be operating. But as we move through the day, it turns into rajas and then it turns into tamas by the time evening comes and we tend to go on sleep. You are right from that perspective. But it is a combination of these two which actually gives you in terms of your experiences. Yes.
Shankarji, will we? Oh, okay. Okay.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, when we see that consciousness is also existence, like Sat Chit Ananda, right?
Correct.
Okay. So when I see a child who's born, but he is not, like his mind is not working, let's say that. He's not getting any signals in his mind, whether hearing, whether seeing or touching, nothing. So he is still existing. How would we describe his consciousness? Just existence.
Just existence is when the consciousness is in an unmanifested form. It still reflection is there. The reflected consciousness is there. Existence, that's why these three are taken not as three different attributes of the jiva, but they are together describes jiva. So existence is not really different from consciousness in that sense, because suppose a consciousness is there. When we say consciousness is there, whether it is in a dormant form or manifested form, is there when we talk about existence is part of it, because unless it is existence, it cannot manifest. Similarly, you cannot say something is existing when it is not manifested enough for us to say that it is existing. So they are not two different things really. It is the same thing, but we look at it in a different way. So when you talk about a child who cannot hear, cannot see, cannot do, it is similar to even elders who fall unconscious, go into a coma. So similarly, so consciousness is there in terms of a dormant manifestation. However, unless that consciousness is there because of existence that we talk about, even we cannot call that as a live person. The sentiency is there. We must assume that consciousness is already there in that, but like it is a new moon day. When the moon is not seen, however, we know that moon is there and we know that the radiation must be there. Only thing is I'm not able to see that.
Okay.
I hope that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Abhimanyu ji, you had some question?
Yeah, earlier you said that the thought won't become experience until the conscious. The way it is, you described it, I would say that the consciousness is always present, because the thought won't be able to arise if consciousness isn't there in the first place, and then you get the experience. So in my, from where I see it, is the consciousness is there before the thought can come and become experience.
Correct. Consciousness is always present, ever present, and throughout present. So it is not only present everywhere, but it is present continuously. And that is my experience as well. Moment I get up till I sleep, I am conscious. No doubt about that in my mind. My own experience supports that.
Because the thought can't arise until the consciousness, unless consciousness is there.
Now it's the other way around. Yeah, consciousness is always present. Thoughts rise and fall
Come
in
and
that
go.
consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So consciousness is there well before thought can arise.
Consciousness is always present, whether thought arises or not.
No, but you
Sun
can't.
radiation is always present.
It can't become an experience.
It can manifest only when there is a proper, appropriate medium. That is the term that we normally use, and that medium happens to be our antakarana, which is the intellect and the mind, which generally we call as mind. Okay. Okay. If no other questions, there are two more very important words, terms in this particular verse. Yeah? We'll try and complete that. One is called Tato Vibhakta. Yeah, Tato Vibhakta. I think it is in the second line of the verse. You will see Tato Vibhakta. It starts with that. Yeah, Tato Vibhakta Tat Samvid. That is how the verse actually is there in the second line. Now, it's a very, very important words that Swamiji actually uses this in terms of this Tato Vibhakta can be understood. Vibhakta means division, separation. Yeah? Separation of what here? Separation of, here the Swamiji says that this separation that we talk about, Tato Vibhakta, is separation from the properties that we talk about in terms of sound, touch, etc. Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, all the 5 sense properties that we talk about, we say that they are different from the known and the knower. Means the properties which are there in that particular object outside, they doesn't belong to the knower who is inside me as a I. So I am introducing a new term here. From consciousness, we are now introducing a term of I, aham. Means this aham is also a vritti. It's also a thought form only, really speaking. And this particular thought that we talk about as the I is different from these 5. And those properties doesn't belong to this knower. That is one way to look at it. Yeah. And the knower of this sound, obviously, as a corollary, becomes different, separate. So, Tato Vibhakta, distinct between these properties and the knower. And knower is what? A consciousness, a term given to the consciousness with one specific aspect in your mind, which we refer to as the ahankara or the ego. So the ego, again, is nothing but a thought in my mind. Unless that driving force of that ahankara is there, the entire world of knowledge becomes irrelevant. Unless the I thought is there in me, who is gaining that experience? We have talked so much about experience, how it is gained, what drives it, etc. But unless that I is there inside, all this becomes redundant. So the I seems to be the person, that ahankara, that vritti, special vritti which is there, is separate out from the entire field of experience or the properties that we talk about. And this is what we talk about as Tato Vibhakta. And if you really come across in terms of, again, who is this I? I, again, is a thought supported by the consciousness. Again, when we talk about this at a higher level, at an individual level, it says that actual experiencer is not the thought whom I am thinking is the I. It is the consciousness which is behind this I, which becomes, like we said, every experience is sentient because it is supported by a consciousness, and every experience has to have, it is nothing but the consciousness being given a different name. So in this particular case also, unless the consciousness is supporting this ahankara, this aham vritti, it cannot operate on its own. And like any other thought, because I'm able to distinguish. Some thoughts I select, some thoughts I don't select. And I'm able to go away from that in terms of the vritti. So the consciousness, which I am giving the name of the I in my mind in terms of a thought, actual consciousness is different. And it is the same consciousness in the overall perspective. If we see, if the 20 people are here or 10 people are here, all 10 I's that we talk about is nothing but a different name given to the same consciousness that supports the entire creation of jivas that we talk about. Tato vibhakta. That division, when it comes to that, the entire aspects of my knowership that we talk about can be distinguished between a thought and the consciousness, I and the consciousness, which actually is the consciousness. Second is, this I itself is different from the sense objects which are there in the form of the thought in my mind, which actually creates this entire world and the experience of me as the jiva. Yeah. So if you take that into the says that Swami Vidyaranya very clearly mentions there that the experience is just name of the consciousness itself when object comes into contact with it. When object comes into contact, it becomes a thought, and it is the thought unless it is supported by the consciousness behind. Because I don't know, I cannot gain that experience. It is the same consciousness which actually gives the is given a different name every time that we say that we gained an experience. Yeah. And normally we say that we are having different experiences, which is very, very common term. And our even thinking and our experience is that I'm having different experiences. When I'm seeing something, my experience is as a seer. When I'm hearing something, my experience is as a hearer. I tell myself I am a hearer, I am a smeller, I am a toucher. Like that, I am a taster. In fact, some people, if their taste buds are very good, they can use that as a profession as well. Wine tasters and all, coffee tasters, smells, this one, etc., etc. There are so many this ones they make use of these senses, and everything becomes a different, distinct experiencer seems to be there. So here, very clearly, the word that Swamiji uses is Aikya Rupyena. Aikya Rupyena means that one particular form only. It is in one particular form or one particular experience itself, which is actually creating this distinct multiple experience, which I experience as the world, and I call that as the world. Unless these five come in, I cannot call the world, I cannot experience the world, I cannot say that this is what it is. Every experience is happening only because of the consciousness, and it is this consciousness which is of one single uniform form, which is there, Aikya Rupyena, one form that we talk about is giving this multiple experience. At an individual level, it is my own so many multiple experiences. But at a collective level, it is the same consciousness, but giving multiple experiences as if to different people, but real experiencer is one and the same. So this experience, that word, that Aikya Rupyena, is very, very important word, where he says that notion that every jiva is having multiple experiences is a fundamental error. It is actually a single uniform consciousness that appear as if they are gaining different experiences, but it is just the same experience in which these thoughts and experiences, they rise and fall. And it appears as if the same consciousness, we are giving different terms and different names for understanding this. So very fundamental thing, this Aikya Rupyena that we talk about, and the notion of multiple experiences, we must actually treat that as a fundamental error, and we must say that it is just consciousness which is having given different names that appears as different experiences. a slightly deeper thought, I would suggest we mull over this particular verse for the next 7 days. And I think we can, we'll close the call now, already 8:45. Okay. So we will start with some questions in the next class. Hopefully, if there are any, please do write somewhere and we will take it up in the next class. Okay. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.